This video is to teach you how to make a bar graph or a column graph in Excel. And so first of all, I just want to go over your research question and how your research question dictates the type of graph that you're going to create, and then we'll go ahead and create the graph. So on the screen you see how does the independent variable affect the dependent variable, and this should always be the way that you word your research questions. Remember, the independent variable is the altered variable. It's the one that you control, the one that you change for your different trials. And the dependent variable is the measured variable. So that is the thing that you are collecting data on. So today I have come up with just a simple research question. It says, how does temperature affect enzyme activity? And so I've identified my independent variable and dependent variable. And in making a graph, I have to determine which of these, independent or dependent, is going to be my y-axis and which is going to be representing my x-axis. And so a way to remember this is just by remembering the phrase dry mix. And this seems kind of silly, but it helps you to remember that dependent, is your y-axis, and independent, is your x-axis. So in this case, when I make my graph, my y-axis will be representing my dependent variable, which is enzyme activity, and my x-axis will be representing my independent variable, which is temperature. Now, from here, I know what my axes should be. Now I need to choose a graph type, and your graph type really depends on your question and the type of data that you plan to collect. So be sure that you've thought that through before you ever start graphing, otherwise it could just get confusing. So how does temperature affect enzyme activity? That is my question. And in this case, I am planning to collect data, measurements made at discrete temperatures. So what I'm planning to do is have a setup at 10 degrees, at 20 degrees, at 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees, and I will measure enzyme activity at each of those discrete temperatures. Okay? This is different than having a research question that says, how does a change in temperature affect enzyme activity? In this case, I would be looking at measurements made over a range of temperatures, okay? So I would start at 10 and increase the temperature to 50 and see how that affects the enzyme activity. So keep in mind that these two are different, and the first is the question that I'm after, and it would be best represented by a bar or column graph because it does have these discrete temperatures or discrete categories, whereas the second question listed here would be best represented with a line graph, which shows our change over time. And so I'm going to be going with the bar graph. I've determined that I need a bar graph or a column graph to represent my information here. I've also determined that the y-axis is going to be representing activity, and the x-axis is going to be representing temperature. So for me, I like to sketch it out so that I know what I'm expecting when I get into Excel, because sometimes Excel doesn't spit out exactly what you want and it can be confusing if you're not sure. So what I'm hoping for is a bar or column graph that has one bar for every temperature. So I had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And I'm hoping to get a bar for every temperature that represents the activity. So it should look something like this. Now, if I get into Excel and it does not look like this, I know that I have some adjustments to make. Now that I've determined my graph type and I've collected my data, I'm going to enter my data into a workbook in Excel. And I like to do it in columns. You could do it in rows. It doesn't really matter. And you should, of course, include your units. My temperatures will be in degrees Celsius, and my enzyme activity can actually be collected in several different ways. So I'll leave that as arbitrary units. Within Excel, once you have your data entered, the best thing to do is to highlight the data that you would like to be included in the graph. And then you're going to go to Charts, and I'd like to select a column graph. And as you can see, all of the options are for clustered graphs or stacked graphs, etc., which wasn't exactly what I was planning on, but those are the only options given. So I'm going to select the clustered column. And this is what I get, and as you can see, this is very different from my super rough sketch. It's not what I was planning. What's happening here is it's basically representing the data in 5 different trials, and it's graphing both sets of data. So it's graphing the temperature and the activity as if they are comparable, which they're not. So I need to make some changes to this graph and make sure that the graph is selected. Okay, so highlight the axis and then click select data. So that's basically the screen you need to get to, is the select data. If you can't get to it, try clicking somewhere else. So this screen will show up, and this is where I can make some adjustments. Now, I'm going to move this over here. The information that I want to be graphed is represented by series 2. As you can see, the red bars are representing the activity, which is what I want to show up on my graph. I do not want series 1, as that's representing the temperature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select series 1 and remove it. So that takes care of one of my issues. Series 1 is gone, temperature is no longer being graphed, and now we just see activity. But my x-axis is not representing temperature like I'd like it to. So I need to adjust my x-axis. And so what I'm going to do is on this screen where it says category x-axis labels, I'm going to click this selection button. And it's going to allow me to highlight whatever it is I want to show up on my x-axis. And so I'm going to highlight this range of temperatures. Alright, once that's been selected, you can click this down arrow and it will apply those changes. So now if we go back and look at our graph, we see that our enzyme activity is graphed and each enzyme measurement is showing up with the appropriate temperature measurement. Okay, so now the graph is looking great, exactly how I want it. But there's some information that's missing, so titles, axis labels, etc. So here I'm going to go to chart layout, and this is where I can add any titles, legends, etc. I'm going to start with a chart title. I'm going to put it above the chart, and my chart title is going to be something like temperature versus activity. I'm going to also give my graph some axis labels. So my horizontal axis or my x-axis will be below. It's going to be temperature. Be sure to include your units, and in this case we're doing Celsius. And then I'm going to add my vertical label as well, or my y-axis. And so this is going to be enzyme activity. And this should have a unit as well, but like I said, we'll leave it as arbitrary since there are so many ways to measure enzyme activity. So this is how you make a bar graph. Please email me or contact me if you have any questions, or we can chat in class.